Okay, so we're starting Unit 2, which is Properties of Matter. And we're going to start with just this little subtopic on alloys so that we can actually talk about our first project that we will need to get done for quarter 1, which sort of relates to metals and alloys. So a term we're going to start with is an alloy. What is an alloy? It is a metal.
It's not pure metal.
But it's not an elemental metal. It's a mixture of metals. It's a homogeneous mixture. And that's another term we will learn, a homogeneous mixture. But that just means it's sort of consistent. It's the same throughout of a metal and one or more other metals. So, for example, steel is an alloy. What's the main component of steel?
Steel.
Iron. But iron, it's also mixed with carbon, which isn't a metal, and other things as well, especially depending on what type of steel you have, because there's lots of types of steel: stainless steel, galvanized steel, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a mixture of metal and one or more other elements. Okay, and it does retain properties common to the metals that are in them, but it's really not a pure metal. So a few examples. Brass. Anyone know what makes up brass?
Copper.
Copper?
Iron.
Not iron. Yeah, do you even know what Zn is? Zinc. Okay, good. And we are going to need to know the element symbols, some of them, for the next chapter. So they're very similar. We'll talk about the numbers later. All right, copper. Shh, hush. Copper and zinc, as a mixture, as a homogeneous mixture, is brass. But it does have to be a mixture. Don't necessarily think that your pennies are brass, because your pennies basically zinc coated with copper. There's a little copper on the outside. And in fact, these days there's barely any copper in pennies at all. How about bronze? Similar?
Pretty similar.
Which one's different?
The zinc.
Yeah, you know what it is? Tin. Copper and tin is bronze. So it's your bronze metal. Brass, usually like a little shinier looking. Jeweler's gold. If you have gold jewelry, it's not going to be pure gold.
It's going to be gold?
There is gold.
And silver.
Well, silver's kind of soft too. And copper for yellow gold. Then there's like white gold. There's different types of gold too that might have some nickel in there. But why wouldn't we have our jewelry like pure 100% gold?
So it's precious.
It's heavier.
It's too soft. The actual main reason is it's too soft. You could dent it easily. Yeah. Au is gold. That is a symbol for gold. Quite a few of these are based off of Latin words, so they might not necessarily make sense to us. We talked about steel. And even fillings, kind of like the old style fillings. Maybe your parents have some fillings like this. You guys probably don't. You probably have the tooth colored fillings that they have these days, but like, you know.
It's like concrete or something.
But interestingly, in the old fillings in your teeth, mercury was actually one of the metals in there, which seems silly and dangerous, but as part of this alloy, you know, it certainly wasn't like leaking into your body or anything. It was safe. Okay, so those are some examples of alloys. And why do I bother to mention this now? I bother to mention this now because of our metal project. So do you now come over here, like zoom. Okay, so your metal project. So not this chapter, but next chapter, we'll finally be talking a lot about the periodic table, how it's organized like this, why it's organized like this. learning some of the names of the elements, the symbols, et cetera, et cetera. So our project that sort of corresponds with that is the metal project. Because interestingly, this whole periodic table of the elements, all the elements that make up the universe, are mainly metals. From this sort of like diagonal section over, all of these are metals. So you have 118 elements, quite a few of which are kind of man-made and only last maybe for a fraction of a second. But the majority of them are metals. So we have our metal project. And in the metal project, you're supposed to come up with some sort of sculpture, like the little metal man in the back there. Just out of common metals you can find around the house. Like, you know, you see he's got some steel wool hair, a paint can. It's got some nuts and bolts for fingers and stuff. Anyway, your project is going to be to come up with a sculpture that has 10 elemental metals, 10 metals that are elements. So every year we come across a problem of somebody saying, I have brass in my project, and counting that as one. Well, if you have brass in your project, that's okay, but don't count it as brass, because you will never find brass up here. Brass is not an element, but brass is an alloy. So you could have something that's brass and tell me that copper's in it, or zinc. And you do have to have 10 different objects, because if you were creative about it, you probably could have one object and say that you had 10 metals in there. But start thinking about common household things and the metals that might be in there. Coins, aluminum cans, you know, things like that. You got to come up with 10 though. So you probably maybe can come up with 5 real easy. But I want you to come up with 10. So start thinking about that, and I'll try to get you the little rubric and handout for that project soon. But it will be due before the quarter's over, so before the end of October.